Let's unbox the Micro Galaxy Squadron Launch Edition AT-ST.
Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it.
Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. As a Star Wars collector, I enjoy collecting not just Star Wars characters, but the vehicles and starships from Star Wars as well. I really love the vintage collection line by Hasbro, but unfortunately the vehicles in that line are very hard to come by here in New Zealand. So I tend to look elsewhere at a few other companies to get my fix of Star Wars vehicles for my collection. Predominantly the Hot Wheels Starships Select line by Mattel and the Micro Galaxy Squadron by Jazware. Now when I started collecting these two lines, I wasn't sure if I was going to open them or keep them in their boxes. So when I started my collecting journey on those two product lines, I kept them all in their boxes. Now though, I'm definitely having a lot more fun opening them up. So I'm going back and finally opening up some of the really early Micro Galaxy Squadron vehicles that I had originally kept boxed, like this Launch Edition AT-ST, and I can't wait to get it open. I've also just opened up the Hot Wheels Starship Select AT-ST, and I really want to see these two side by side. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll open this up. We'll take a closer look at the AT-ST, really up close, really fun. But first, let's take one last look at the packaging. The Micro Galaxy Squadron product line is divided into a couple of different packaging styles for different classes of ships. The AT-ST in particular is from the light armor class, so that means it is packaged on a cardboard backing card with a nice clear bubble here on the front. We can see that this is the Launch Edition version of this particular ship. We have a fantastic shiny gold foil sticker here on the backing card that has the Millennium Falcon there. And of course, because the Launch Edition was Series 1, we also have that red stripe down on the left-hand side that says Series 1. We've got the Micro Galaxy Squadron logo here on a cardboard insert inside the front bubble, and across the bottom of that insert we have a silver stripe with the ship name AT-ST, and we can see that this is number 9 in the product line. We have a few inserts here. We have a little picture here showing that we can put the included AT-ST pilot minifigure inside the cockpit. That's going to be great. And for me personally, obviously I kept this one in its packaging for a while. I just love that foil sticker there. But I think this one is perhaps a little bit awkward because to fit the AT-ST within this packaging style, the cockpit, the head of the vehicle is tipped to the side. So when we're looking at it from the front, it looks like it's sort of looking off to the side here. If we want to look at it side on, we're just looking through the side of the packaging, not the best in the product range. I still thought it was cool, kept it all this time, but I think it's going to look a little cooler out of the packaging now, to be honest. Moving on to the back. Now, of course, we're very familiar with the backing styles of this packaging line. We have the collectible cut out and keep AT-ST blueprint card here. So if you discard your packaging, you can cut this out as a condensed little reminder of some of the ship details. Really fun there. And we have a sort of a hologram image here of the AT-ST. We can see light armor class noted there beneath it. And we have a couple of features pictured here. We can turn the cockpit 180 degrees there, and we have 3 points of articulation there on the legs. And of course down here we can see some of those other ships from that first Series 1. It's really fun and nostalgic looking back at some of those original series ships there. How many of them did you manage to collect? Even the chase vehicles. I did manage to get both of these. Really cool. And I've got this one on hand to do a bit of comparison with the standard version later on in the video. I really like the packaging style of this product line. It had felt like a little while since we'd had just a completely brand new Star Wars product line here in New Zealand. So when these arrived at our local toy stores, it was really exciting to see these alongside the standard action figures by Hasbro. So I did keep them in their packaging for a while just to sort of admire it. It just brought me a lot of joy, but I've been opening up most of my modern series, so it's time to go back, open up Series 1 and get them on display alongside the rest of them. So let's get stuck in. After carefully removing the front plastic bubble off of the backing card, I can finally clearly see that really cool battle scene art on the backing card. We can see some of the Imperial troop transport vehicles down the bottom, and of course we have an AT-ST there in the corner. I really like the art on the backing cards from the Micro Galaxy Squadron line, so that's why I like to keep my packaging. But let's take a closer look at the AT-ST itself. I'm so excited to get stuck in and check out the AT-ST, but first let's take a quick look at the included minifigure. We have here one singular minifigure, the AT-ST pilot. I love the detail that they managed to fit on these little figures, and it's been a while since I opened a Series 1 Micro Galaxy Squadron vehicle because it kind of threw me aback a little bit. The back of the capsule is just plain, so if you recall, most of the modern series has a really fun blueprint style artwork of the figure here. We have the TIE pilot from the TIE Interceptor from a later series there. I'd completely forgotten that there isn't a blueprint of the figure on the back. Just something fun, a sort of little bit of a throwback there because of course we're looking at Series 1. So let's pop this figure out and check out all of the really cool little details because there is so much going on with these tiny little figures. They are so small. So we have here, of course, he's in a gray sort of a flight suit there, but some really impressive painted details. He's got black gloves, black boots, even a black belt with a silver belt buckle. And for his helmet, we have that sort of military green color with a chin strap also painted in green and black for the visor there. Just incredible the amount of paint that they managed to get on these small little figures. Now the heads don't move, but the arms do. We've got to get them into a cockpit position. So let's move the arms up very carefully. This arm is set a little bit higher than the other one. They usually sort of move together, but that one is just a little bit higher than the other one. There we go. That looks a bit better. And of course, he's also angled at the hips there, so we can get him into a seated cockpit position. So I'll just put him to the side because of course I want to look at the AT-ST itself now. So I opened up the Chase variant. It was a silver rare, 15,000, which was the Raider version that we see in the Mandalorian series, but I never went back and opened up this one. I had kept it on display, but it's really fun to sort of get it out and have a little bit of a trip down memory lane since it's been a while since I opened up the variant version. Of course, this is supposed to be from the original trilogy, and the first thing that I really noticed when I got it out of the packaging was just how weathered this is. I know you can kind of see through those clear windows. It lets in a lot of light, but there is some really fine detail on these ships that gets a little bit lost when looking through that plastic, and I was just surprised at how much kind of dirty weathering this one has. I kind of like the weathering of the Micro Galaxy Squadron line. They don't look sort of like clean, fresh toys. They look sort of like, you know, in world they've met some action and gotten some sort of battle damage. You know, some of them have some really interesting paint jobs for sort of scoring and sort of just general wear and tear. And I'm just really having fun looking at this kind of, it's kind of a little bit more of sort of like a grey dirty wash over the most of the ship. And then on the legs in particular, we have this almost orange. I thought it would be a bit more brown, but it's almost reading a bit more orange under the light. That's really interesting across the legs in this sort of area here. And on this side, it's more a little bit up further up here. Really interesting. We can see some of that sort of battle damage, sort of, well, I say battle damage, but just sort of action grime there on the side of the ship. It's really interesting. I've seen other sort of cheap, you know, sort of like fast food takeout sort of versions of the AT-ST because this kind of ship is so iconic. It fits well into sort of toy format and stuff like that because you can easily hold it and play it around. But I like the detail that Micro Galaxy Squadron line puts into their collectibles. They are generally, although they are sold in the toy department, they are very, very popular with adult collectors. So I like the level of detail that they put on them, and the weathering just helps bring out all of the small little details. So just going to quickly go over those movement features that we saw pictured on the backing card there. So it said that there were 3 points of articulation in the legs. At the ankles, we can see that articulation pin there. So doesn't want to go down, but we can completely go up. So it goes flat there. Same again on this side. Nice articulation, moves freely but not sort of flapping around. Then we have the second one here, kind of at the reverse knee, I suppose this is. That's nice and stiff, because if you remember some of these sort of vintage era or certainly Hasbro ones, the weight of the cockpit has a tendency to compress down at these very, very thin legs, just the sheer weight of the cockpit. So we want these joints, the articulation points, to have a good grip. We want them to hold place. Even though this is a much smaller toy, there's not as much weight here in the cockpit. I don't want this thing sort of falling over there. So really nice articulation there at those sort of knees there. Again on this one here. Now it says the third articulation point is at sort of the shoulder point here. But if I recall from the other one, it's kind of articulated, but not really. It doesn't sort of swing very, very stiff. If I recall, and I'm just going to do a quick little test, I think these are removable. So I feel like, there we go. You can see the attachment point there. It's got a little bit more of sort of like a hexagon shape, and we've got a circular attachment peg there. So technically, you can kind of move it around at that point, but it kind of really wants to grip on. So I wouldn't really, technically you can move it there, but I wouldn't really call that an articulation point. I think most of the movement and the posing is going to be from this main point here and at those sort of ankle points there. And I will say it stands up very nicely there. I don't really need to worry about it toppling down. Very sturdy. Of course, it's much lighter. Just the physical size means that this isn't a really big, heavy cockpit, so stands up nicely. And of course, we should be able to turn the cockpit as well. Again, a little bit stiff, but I like that movement. I can turn that without too much trouble. Very nice. And we can also move this front sort of weaponry array there at the front. We can get that quite all the way down there. That's quite you can shoot down at the ground if you've got a rebel enemy underneath you there. And let's just check out, yes, this left array can also spin around there, all the way around. There we go, all the way around. And the one on this side is very flat. That's just part of the sculpting. That one's not going to spin or come out. That's just attached there. And of course, we've got the all-important cockpit here on the top. So sometimes in the Micro Galaxy Squadron line, there is a lever or something like that to sort of pry and get it in, to get your fingernail in to open it up. This is really tight here. So what I used to do is I just sort of press onto this part, and we can flip that open and we can see inside the seat. So on a lot of the modern Micro Galaxy ships that we get in the later series, there's usually some kind of clip or some kind of partition to put in between the legs so the figures don't rattle around. Now this one, it doesn't have anything like that. That is just a big sort of internal cockpit. That's a very big seat, a big chair as it will. One big chair. Of course, we know that there is supposed to be sort of spaces for two there, with a little bit of space in behind when we see Chewbacca and the Ewoks in here. You know, we are supposed to fit multiples in there, but of course, in the Micro Galaxy Squadron line, the characters that go in the vehicles are a little bit off scale, just to be able to show that, you know, us humans can actually hold those figures. So I don't mind the fact that it's not completely to scale on the inside. I really like being able to add figures inside cockpits on this line. I think it sort of adds a little bit of fun. And of course, we can see that the little windows here, there isn't any clear plastic there. That is just completely sort of empty, just all the way through, just air there. We don't have a lens or anything in there for those windows. But you can see the weathering extends to the inside of the cockpit. The chair in there is weathered, it looks grimy, and also that interior design on the top flap there, very weathered. We can see it kind of getting into all of those sculpting lines. I love the sculpting on these ones. You know, this could just be plain flat plastic. It's on the inside. We're not really going to see it when it's on display, but I like that the weathering extends to all different surfaces here. Really fun. Can't wait to get the figure in there, but I'm just going to clip that closed. It doesn't kind of snap closed, but it sits there nice and securely. Very cool. You can just see the hinge points there just to sort of open and close that. Now again, lots of cool sculpting detail here on the back, highlighted by that sort of grime weathering. Really fun there. I like that they really hide these sort of attachment points in the seam lines, and that we have a few sort of hinge points here, like there, there, and there. But for the most part, there aren't like big screws or anything sort of really visible here. We've even got sculpting detail on the underside of the feet. No flat surfaces anywhere. We do have a little bit of printing here to show the sort of assortment, the item number there printed in black on the underside, but we don't have any sort of large screws or rivets visible on the underside of this. Really fun. I can even see sort of grime and stuff like that in all of the little crevices. I love the sculpting details on this. Really cool. Of course, the AT-ST is just such an iconic Star Wars original trilogy vehicle. It's not really a sort of a Star Wars vehicle collection without one representation of it. I have quite a few AT-STs in my Hasbro 3.75-inch collection. I love them to bits, but they do just have those issues with the legs. So I'm just happy to have this smaller version that feels fairly sturdy to sort of put on my display. I'm not going to have to sort of support it up with fishing line. This is really cool. Really fun. Of course, I've had it on display in its plastic packaging all of this time, but it's just something I've certainly really enjoyed opening up all of my modern versions from the Micro Galaxy Squadron line and getting them out of display and just really being able to see all of the details much better. I can see some of that orange weathering here on this foot here as well. Really interesting color. I generally think of, just because of the Hasbro versions, if I think of sort of the AT-ST walkers on Endor, I generally think of green weathering, you know, sort of going through the forest and that. The orange is an interesting choice, but it does sort of make it quite distinct and unique. That's really fun. Loving the detail on this thing. Okay, so I'll try and, I have played around with the articulation a little bit, so it will look a little bit wonky because of course we do have a little bit of movement, so it might not be dead straight in terms of that. I'll probably play around with it even more. I like going over all of my Star Wars toys. When you get them out of the packaging, it's like Christmas, and I want to get stuck in there, check out all of the details, really play with it, and then kind of choose a specific pose and a specific place in my collection before it goes to sort of a permanent display home. And this one's really fun. I like just having these little parts that I can move on it. So I mentioned that I had a couple of other items to compare beside it, but first let's get our little minifigure into the cockpit. So I have my little AT-ST pilot figure. So let's go and have a look and see how well he's going to sit in here. Now, usually this is always a little bit of a tricky part because we've got a partition or something to fit in between the legs to hold them in place, but this one doesn't. So I guess I'm just going to sort of drop him in there. And you can see he's kind of going to rattle around in there a little bit. There's nothing really holding him in place, but I don't really mind. Sometimes I don't mind if I can just sort of drop things in and then just sort of tip them out. It's certainly a little less stressful. And this is one of the few vehicles with an internal sort of pilot figure where we don't really see the figure at all from the outside. The windows are so high up in the cockpit, I can't see his helmet through there. We don't have a clear cockpit like we do on, say, an X-Wing fighter where we can clearly see the figure inside. So even if he's upside down, whatever, sort of, I could put any kind of random little minifigure, or he could not be in there, you know, just completely empty, and I really can't see there through. And also when we've got that top lid closed, I like the fact that, of course, we don't have light through it. Those sort of cockpit windows are quite dark, so I like that they're sort of, you can see through them if I'm looking up really close, but it kind of looks dark, which is kind of fun. On some versions, they are just painted black because it pretty much looks black once you close it up. So it looks really cool, and I like that I can pose it. Of course, when it comes to posing things that are suspended on two legs, you've only got limited posability before you just make it unstable. So it's probably going to look pretty much something like this, but I can turn the head around, I can pose the different weapon arrays pointing at different things. Really cool. So let's compare it to the other version, the rare variant, which is this one. So this one's got some really fun paint job. Obviously this was the Klatooinian Raiders that we see in The Mandalorian that have kind of taken over an Imperial Walker here and given it a bit of a interesting custom paint job. So we can see we've got the really fun white striping here on the main body all the way through onto the side parts here. We've got a little bit of sort of orange splashing that goes around to the back, and then of course we've got this very prominent dark red leg, also with that white striping, and a bit more of a tan brown leg here on the other side. But we can see that, of course, paint job aside, these are identical in terms of the sculpt. We do see this across the Micro Galaxy Squadron line, even when ships are technically a little bit different in terms of the sculpting, like the A-Wing. We saw the A-Wing used for Resistance and Original Trilogy and Rebels. Even though those are slightly different sculpts, there would be some variance as what we see them on screen, but in terms of the Micro Galaxy Squadron toy, they are all the same. So I was expecting these to be pretty much identical, but it's just fun to see. It gives them a very different look. I really like seeing these two side by side. I've had this one on display for a while, so it is quite familiar to me, but it was just fun really sort of going over the details on this one and just seeing these two side by side. They look really different. This one will probably live in my Mandalorian section, and this one's going to be joining my Imperial section because, of course, it just has to. These are really fun. And for a bit of a bonus comparison, I mentioned that I had also recently unboxed the Hot Wheels Starships Select version. This one is really fun, and I was really quite fascinated to see when I opened this one up. It felt familiar, and you can see it is almost the same in terms of these two. If I just move this one out of the way because it's brightly colored, and we see these two side by side. The scale is remarkable. So the Hot Wheels Starship Select line are not in scale to each other. They have a standardized box size and all of the vehicles fit inside, regardless of whether it's an AT-ST like this or a Star Destroyer. So you get some really interesting ships in the product line that can't be done in other ones that are to scale, like the Micro Galaxy Squadron line is mostly to scale. But it's really fun to see these versions and see that they are pretty much the same, which is kind of fun, but also makes it a little bit tricky for collectors, because if you're looking for an AT-ST to put on your shelf, to your display, now you've got a really distinct choice here between these two. Now this one, of course, is very heavy. It is die-cast metal, so it feels a lot different to this one here. And of course, we do not have the articulation here in the legs. It is a fixed model. So the legs are fixed here. The only parts that move are the cockpit, which is quite stiff. And we have a little bit of movement in the front sort of weaponry here and the weaponry here on the side, which this part is actually plastic. And of course, the cockpit on this one, it does not open. The cockpit on this one, it does. But you can just see just the incredible, of course they have to use, you know, the imagery, the reference guides from Lucasfilm, but it's just really fun to see two completely different and competing toy manufacturers making essentially the same thing. There are a few differences when I sort of really line them up. The array on this one is much larger, and this one is also larger in comparison to the Micro Galaxy Squadron one, but there's just something fun about just the variations here. If you love the AT-ST, it's kind of fun to see so many different versions all lined up depending on, whoops, I just knocked that one over. I've moved his feet. There we go. Really fun to see the different versions. Sometimes I think of them as sort of meaning that in classic Imperial grey, like, you know, the big AT-AT walkers and stuff like that. So sometimes I like seeing an AT-ST in this sort of classic Imperial grey, like so many of the other ships. But then sometimes I think back to some of my Hasbro ones that had a lot of weathering, and I like the fact that the AT-ST was one of the ships in the Hasbro era that did actually have quite a lot of variance with the weathering. We had sort of snow on the legs and then grass on the indoor ones and things like that. So I kind of like the fact that we've got some color coming in there, and just the overall palette is a little bit more beigey with some tan and orange, not nearly as sort of cold and Imperial here as the grey one. So it's going to sort of depend on what kind of vibe you enjoy from the AT-ST. Do you sort of like the cold, sort of heavy machinery look? This one might be more for you. Or do you like the ones that are sort of like, you know, out there in the forest and sort of getting dirty and muddy and stuff like that? This is so fun. I'm just sort of blown away by the fact that they're all pretty much identical in terms of the size. There's not too much in the way of difference. Really fun. And for us here in New Zealand, these are pretty much all the same price as well. So very difficult if you really have a budget or display space limitations, or perhaps you don't need multiples, you just want one to finish expensive one, I would have a hard time. I love both these product lines, the Hot Wheels Starship Select and the Micro Galaxy Squadron, for different reasons. They each have sort of attractive aspects to them and some downsides to them, and it really does depend from collector to collector. Personally, for me, I'm trying to collect both as best I can because I love them both. There are some items in the Micro Galaxy Squadron line that are really hard to find elsewhere, but I like the fact that Hot Wheels all line up and they come with display stands. This one has a display stand, but I don't have it here because it does set it up a little bit higher, and I just wanted to see these ones all lined up because these ones don't have stands, so I wanted to just see them all together. This was so much fun. I love just seeing Star Wars vehicles. It's almost a little bit like sort of popcorn. You can't always buy the really big ones from Hasbro, you know, the ones that are supposed to be in scale to the action figures. So sometimes you just want some really cool Star Wars vehicles to put around your space on a display. These are really fun. My little army here of AT-STs is growing. I kind of want to army build them, you know, just get like a whole bunch of them. Really fun. It would have been fun perhaps if this one had come with maybe like a little Ewok figure. That would have been really cool because we do have astromechs in this particular product line, so small little minifigures are not out of the question, but I don't think they have included any figures that are not intended to fit in here. But maybe they would give us a variant with like 2 Ewoks or something. That would be kind of fun. Maybe like, you know, like a bit of battle damaged or something like that, and 2 Ewoks to put in. That would be kind of fun because Hot Wheels Starship Select did do a convention exclusive variant of this AT-ST with Chewbacca out of the cockpit. That was really fun. I sadly don't have that one. Getting US convention exclusives is very hard for us here in New Zealand, but I'm happy that I was able to get a hold of all of these 3, including this one, which was a rare variant from the product line in that very first wave. This has been really fun. I kept this one in its box for so long, but I'm learning more and more as I open up more of my boxed Star Wars collectibles that I really do, personally for me, enjoy seeing them out. I love going over the details, articulation, paint job, all of that kind of stuff. It's the closest us adult collectors get to really sort of playing with the toys, and it just makes me appreciate them more, really going over and inspecting them up close. Don't get me wrong, I do have quite a few collectibles that look amazing in their boxes, and I do intend to keep them in their boxes, but for these 2 product lines, I've learned that for me personally, I like to have the Star Wars vehicles on display out of the packaging. So I hope you had fun seeing these 3 lined up, because I certainly did. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars collectible, checked out all of the details, compared it to a few others, and had just a lot of fun. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again really soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a Micro Galaxy Squadron fan, I recently unboxed the TIE Interceptor vehicle. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole Micro Galaxy Squadron unboxing playlist. This is the way.